prepare to take cover as we are exploring the movies of Suzuki Seijun. It happens to be the centenary of his birth. And in celebration, Metro Cinema, in cooperation with the Japan Foundation, is presenting a select handful of Seijun's remarkable body of work on brand new 35mm prints. William Carroll is a prof from the University of Alberta. He's written a book entitled Suzuki Seijun and Post-War Japanese Cinema. He joins me now here on Thoroughfare to talk about movies, to talk about the Yakuza, and why maybe it's a good idea to keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. Good afternoon, Will. Thanks for doing this.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. I'm very happy to do this.
Just to sort of elucidate our audience, shine a light, as it were, on his work, can you tell me what characterizes his films? Is it a visual style? Is it a choice of material?
Basically, what I came down to is that it's the juxtaposition of narrative and stylistic elements that would seem to be otherwise irreconcilable, kind of meeting in unity in his films. Because he, on the one hand, he shifts so much stylistically over time. There's not really a single identifiable stylistic tick that's consistent through his work, and he moves a lot from being like a studio filmmaker to kind of an independently motivated studio filmmaker to finally independent filmmaking in the last few decades of his career. So there's a big shift in subject matter that he covers over that time, and kind of the industrial context that he's working in, and maybe to an extent target audience as well. But there's a consistent sensibility really that starts from his earliest films, that it's kind of the sensation of, as a viewer, just having the rug pulled out from under you while you're watching one of his films. I would say, you seem to be making sense of a scene, and then suddenly there's a shot that reveals something, and then the spatial relations and what was going on in terms of narrative turns out to be something totally different from what you had initially expected.
He's a curious character because of the fact that if you read his own account, Suzuki's own account of his experiences as a soldier, for example, in the Japanese army, where he infers that life-threatening events were sometimes even comical. He was adrift at sea, apparently, for several days after his ship was bombed. But what is also interesting is this kind of trickles down into his work, like put on your coveralls and go to work for Nikatsu, which is the company that he worked for so many years. And they were just cranking out movies like Canned Tuna. As you suggested, it was a real studio, and they cranked out all of these B movies. And there seems to be a corollary between his military service and being employed by Nikatsu in that way. But through it all, he has this irreverent sense of humor. Would it be fair to say that trickles down into much of his work?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly just thinking what you said about his own account of his experience and coming to the conclusion that death was absurd is something that you can see in the way that he portrays quite a few death scenes in his films, particularly some of the, one of the films that's showing in this series, Satan's Town, is filled with these just kind of outrageously staged murder sequences between these different gangsters who are trying to pull off a heist. And you can kind of see his depiction of it in some of his later films as well. Something like Tokyo Drifter, where in order to show a character getting killed, instead of the usual dramatic death scene, you just see the sort of lighting and color design just go totally haywire while it's happening.
Exactly. And to that point, I noticed, for example, in Tokyo Drifter, he has a real affinity and I think a passion for a color palette. He uses a lot of primary colors. I noticed like reds and yellows, for example, really stand out in the club in Tokyo Drifter. And a lot of that kind of yellow color palette I noticed even in the films of Quentin Tarantino. Would it be fair to say that he had an influence on a lot of contemporary filmmakers like Tarantino?
Yeah, certainly Tarantino is someone who's mentioned him. Actually, interestingly, Nikatsu's films in the 60s were also circulating. They were getting released in Hong Kong at the time. So quite a few Hong Kong filmmakers from the 80s and 90s, people like John Woo and Johnny To, if you know who they are.
Yeah.
Were watching his films when they were coming out in the 60s and have also cited them as influences. And I guess another Hong Kong filmmaker, Wong Kar-wai, and of course Jim Jarmusch, I guess, is the other one I can think of offhand, whose movie Ghost Dog makes a lot of references to Branded to Kill.
There's definitely an inference there in a lot of Jim Jarmusch's work, I think, in the way that he uses the studio combined with locations. Do you think at this point in the celebration of his centenary, Suzuki Seijun would revel in being called an indie filmmaker?
It's difficult to say what Suzuki himself would have said in an interview, in part because, frankly, I think a lot of the things that he said to interviewers tended to be a little bit disingenuous, or like he was kind of like, it seems at times almost like he's trying to make fun of people who are asking him questions. He has tended to be dismissive of like overly serious interpretations of his work, especially the Nikatsu work, and say that like he didn't really put any thought into it. He just thought it would be interesting, when in fact he was very actively working with a number of independent filmmakers, even at Nikatsu, who were like rewriting screenplays for him to make them more what he wanted to make. That's part of what got him in trouble with the studio, that he was kind of actively courting sort of a burgeoning cinephile audience.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yes, he is an independent filmmaker, I would say.
Well, thank you for not playing me the way Suzuki Seijun would play his interviewers. Will Carroll, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us here at CKUA. Well, we're excited to have you do that, and it's a rare and delicious opportunity to dig into this canon of work from this incredible artist. Thanks a lot for taking the time. We have a vast library. Speaking of music and Suzuki Seijun, the films coming out of Nikatsu had amazing soundtracks, I have to say. Can I play a song for you?
Do you have Nikatsu songs? The most appropriate thing would be probably the theme song from Tokyo Drifter.
That was Prof. William Carroll. Thanks to him for chatting with me this afternoon. He's written a book entitled Suzuki Seijun and Post-War Japanese Cinema. He will be introducing the films at Metro Cinema, as it's a series featuring this remarkable B filmmaker from Japan who inspired so many others, as per our conversation. Artists such as Quentin Tarantino, Wong Kar-wai, John Woo, and Jim Jarmusch. Check out the full lineup of screenings, which commence this weekend at Metro Cinema. It's metrocinema.org. As per Will's request, this is from the soundtrack to the film Tokyo Drifter.